Hello, and welcome to Paraculture Coco, home of the Coco. I have ideas. And most of them are about dismantling patriarchy and healing its wounds of dehumanization and mandatory obedience to irrational authority that it has inflicted upon us all. So, with that in mind, let's listen to this pastor explain to us why women should be legally barred from voting, working, and speaking in public to live exclusively as the property of men. Preach to us, brother.
In a nutshell, in general, I don't want to see women in the public sphere. You mean they shouldn't hold political office? Correct. You mean you don't want to see them podcasting? Correct. Well, but what about in the marketplace, with 9 to 5, careers? No, not that either. Like, I don't want to see women holding positions in the public square. I don't.
There are certain books that I've just had to say, hey, I don't know if this is a bad book, but I don't have time to read it. And so you're not going to read it either. We'll read it together. I remember recently my wife had a book and I saw her reading it on the couch. And it was about paedobaptism. And I said, no, we're not doing that yet. We will become paedobaptists when I'm ready. But my wife's not going to be a paedobaptist for 3 years before I am. And I don't have time to read it right now. I know the arguments will be great. I will agree and disagree. I'm not sure which arguments are better, but for the time being, this is what I'm persuaded of, and you're not going to outpace me. And that's not, for the record, that's not lazy. It can be. And you have to be honest with yourself and discerning of your motives, but that's not inherently lazy. I have 4 people in my life that I dictate the hours in their day. I dictate what time they go to the bathroom, when we eat, what we wear. They are my children. Those are the people that I have almost limitless authority with.
The reason why I have grown to despise democracy is because it's not we the people. A raw universal, because that's what we have is a universal democracy. Everyone is allowed to vote. Right. Everyone. And just for the record, I think the 19th Amendment should be repealed. I think that because, well, first and foremost, because I'm a Christian, and that is the Christian position. Oh my gosh, you're saying that? Yes, that is the Christian position, is that households should not be divided against one another. So it's not just elevating a male vote, but it's elevating the household vote. We're saying that that society, if you break it down to the basic building block, is not atomistic as individuals, but molecular, being households. That the way that God sees humanity is He breaks them down to families, and so that it's not just random individual atoms all bouncing around together, and 350 million atoms bouncing together in one nation, on one piece of land, but it's families. And so by repealing the 19th Amendment, just for the record, it's not just trying to take away a female vote, but it's trying to say, no, there's a family vote. Right. There's a household. And it's like, well, where do women get their voice? Where women get their voice is from their father, from their husband. If they're not married, it's from their father. If they're not married and their father is dead, it's from their brother, it's from their uncle, it's the men in their lives that love them.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't trust a man who is afraid of his wife's literacy? I mean, when I think of a strong man and a capable leader, I envision a man who's afraid of the library. I see a man who refuses to stumble into the sin of learning from a woman. And nothing projects masculine strength like tyrannically controlling what your children wear and when they can use the bathroom. Like, I have to thank this pastor for these lessons in Christian domination, because it made me realize how permissive I've been with my dog. Because, like, when she scratches at the door, I bring her out. Like, who's walking who here? Am I right? Hey, Morty, I'm a benevolent patriarch now, so you only pee when I say so. Yeah. And like, okay, it's funny because my dog Maud, she was a Puerto Rican street dog for the first 2 years of her life, right? So, like, she literally does not need me to survive, right? She chooses to live with me and stay with me. Like, straight up, this one time, we rented a house in, like, the middle of nowhere, and she ran away, which is very rare for her. And I was, like, freaking out. She never does that. But she came back, like, an hour or so later, and she was covered in blood. And I was like, ah! But she was not injured at all. She just, like, went out to get a snack. So, like, Maud legitimately could live without me. I know this for a fact. And that is why I am grateful that she chooses to live with me, right? All of that to say, me and my dog choose each other because we desire to live life together, because we like and love each other. And that is a higher state of connection and love than this pastor has ever experienced in his entire life. But you know what they say, there ain't no hate like Christian love. Dog jokes aside, let's focus on him wanting to bar women from public life and voting. It seems kind of urgent, right? So in this video, we're going to talk about the psychology of men who want to wield state-sponsored violence against women to force us out of personhood to be subjugated into the legal property of men. Like, what's up with that? Why do they desire this? So first and foremost, these men are incapable of perceiving their own selves as human, right? And this is the dehumanization intrinsic to patriarchy. Dehumanization is not only about the objectification of the other. It's not only about turning women from people into property. It is equally about the total annihilation of the self, of the individual male. In The Will to Change, Bell Hooks writes, the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. If an individual is not successful in emotionally crippling himself, he can count on patriarchal men to enact rituals of power that will assault his self-esteem. Which, yes, abso-freaking-lutely. So the emotional crippling of boys and men is required to annihilate their sense of self, of individuality, of self-esteem, and personal empowerment. The total annihilation of self is achieved when men identify as their gender, not as individual human beings. So the intention of rituals of power is to indoctrinate boys and men into patriarchal masculinity, which replaces self-esteem with male conformity and seeking male approval, right? So you get rid of self-esteem and any emotional processes that build inner authority, the ability to trust your own self and your judgment, right? So that all gets replaced with seeking male conformity and male approval. And so they seek male approval also as confirmation that they are a part of the herd, not a target of the herd, right? To be an individual man who develops a sovereign and emotionally healthy sense of self is to betray the inherent codependence of patriarchal masculinity and to thus make yourself a target. So men end up dependent on their gender for both identity and feelings of safety, not their own selves specifically. And so this process is the introduction of dehumanization that men inflict upon boys, and it's how boys and men learn to sadistically police the emotionality and individuality out of each other. And this dehumanization of the self first is what leads to the sadism against women that this pastor is trying to institutionalize through state violence. But it's confusing, right? Like, why would a man want the state to violently subjugate women? Well, they want to create leverage of control by birthright so that men can avoid the existential dread of individuality by sadistically consuming a woman into his self-concept. And don't worry, we're going to unpack it. Stay with me now. Stay with me. All right. So patriarchal men do not want to be human. All right. They want to feel idealized like a god. Patriarchy has beaten the individuality and the humanity out of them, and they are psychologically fractured for it, right? In the vacuum of their own dehumanization, they want to feel above humanity, not fundamentally equal in their humanness with others and thus able to genuinely connect human to human. So if you watch the first 2 videos in our Madonna Hut to the Or series, you know all about this will to feel idealized amongst patriarchal masculinity. And this is just another horrible expression of that unconscious drive and fracturing. Yay, core wounding! It oozes out in every direction. So, to serve this goal of idealization, patriarchy subjugates all people beneath men as lesser humans. This is the purpose of hierarchy, right? So, patriarchal hierarchy says that the default representation of humanity is men. They are the superior and default expression of humanity. And then beneath them, you have inferior subhuman women. And from her innate inferiority, men are entitled to make use of her, to give her meaning by using her for his purposes and profit, right? That is the entitlement of being the superior and the requirement of being the inferior human. And then beneath women, you have poor children who are the least human of the lot. And so this artificial hierarchy is about rejecting the fundamental equality of humanness. The truth that no person is more or less human than another human being, right? Right, so another person may be more or less developed in a variety of ways, right? May have different skills and talents that I do not. We are still equally human, right? I am not more human than any other person walking this earth. You are not more human than any other person walking this earth, right? Not even children, right? Children are equal in their humanness to adults, even though they are in a different developmental stage. That does not affect the humanness of children. Humanness is not a thing that some people are more of or less of. So, from this foundation of dehumanization, patriarchal men equate their masculinity, their innately superior masculinity, which has replaced their sense of individual humanity, right? They equate their masculinity with owning and sadistically controlling women, okay? So that is the expression of their superiority, of their godlike status above subhuman women and children, that they are entitled to make use of the way God is entitled to move through you, to use you, to inflict experiences upon you. And what are you going to do to God? Right? What are you going to do? How are you going to hold God accountable? You just don't. So that is the expression of their superiority, right? Of their godlike status above the subhuman women and children. Sadistically owning and controlling women and children is how these men consume feeling idealized and godlike from lording above. So what's the easiest way to feel like a god? Well, you hoard all the resources and consolidate power through collusion of violence to ensure that you sadistically own and control women and children. That you can do whatever you want and they have no mechanisms of enacting consequence against you, right? So that is how men, when they have the leverage of total control of resources and institutions, then they are empowered to grant resources or withhold them, to create opportunities or destroy them, to charm their dependents or harm them, right? They are enabled to force others to obey their every command and arbitrary whim, no matter how nonsensical or abusive, because if they do not submit to doing whatever that man wants, well, there's a threat of violence, of exile, or having the resources necessary to survive be removed. That is godlike, right? I can destroy or create you on a whim, and there's nothing you can do. You just have to take it. That's the sadism of their God complex. So to achieve the leverage to bestow or destroy on whim, men must manufacture structures of male welfare, right? Structures that irrationally elevate and empower men by subjugating and disempowering women, and thus children. So what you need then is the daddy state to step in, to wield state-sponsored violence to force women into artificial dependence on men, where women cannot choose to live independently or provide for themselves, where women are forced to be the literal property of men. And that is the goal here. The pastor is arguing that we must politically mobilize and enact violence to force women and children into mandated obedience and dependence on men, so men can feel like little lords and tyrants and thus achieve their goal of feeling idealized and godlike and not human. This is the root of the father wound I use. Patriarchy is the institutionalization of this father wound I use, where men feel entitled to use women and children to feel idealized and godlike and avoid their own, fractured humanity. And this is where you get men like this pastor who feel best when they tyrannically control when their kids can use the bathroom and what books their wife can read. So to be clear, a healthy father figure invests in the people around them, right? He leads through contribution and presence. A healthy father figure is not threatened by the confidence, individuality, and empowerment of another person because he does not rely on degrading and violating others to feel powerful. The wounded father figure tyrannically and sadistically uses and controls people to extract personal feelings of idealization and superiority. They equate violation with power. This pastor equates violation and arbitrary sadistic control with power. When he does not have access to a woman to exercise that impulse, he feels powerless. So let's talk about sadism a little bit. We usually think about sadism as taking pleasure in harming, abusing, and humiliating others. But that's actually not the point of sadism. Those are merely the tools of sadism. Sadism is about dominating enmeshment, okay? The enmeshment of I use and you must submit to being used by me. And this is the foundation of this pastor's vision of Christian love and mandatory heterosexuality. It's a vicious and codependent fusion where two people form a whole that is less than the sum of its parts. By dominating, owning, abusing, tormenting, humiliating, and arbitrarily controlling and punishing a woman, the sadistic man feels whole and he soothes himself from the existential dread of an individual life experience. So the sadistic man is seeking to colonize a woman, colonize her entire being to receive a counterfeit sense of control and godlike authority. He is self-soothing by making himself feel powerful through degrading her, controlling her, negging her, okay? So the point isn't torment and humiliation. Those are the tools to experience the self-soothing. By radically, tyrannically controlling you, I feel in control as a man. I have consumed you into my self-identity, and now I don't feel existential dread. I don't feel the aloneness and individuality of being an individual person because I have colonized you and now we are a symbiotic fusion and I don't feel that existential dread no more. Seriously, it goes that deep because being an individual means enduring freedom and the individual experience of life and learning how to self-soothe and tolerate those moments of absolute existential dread where you feel so separate and isolated in your own individuality. Like every adult experiences that at various points of time, right? For real. And as adults, we have to learn how to self-soothe and hold ourselves through those moments, right? So men like this pastor are seeking to avoid dealing with the existential dread of individuality and building self-esteem and all of these internal processes of becoming a sovereign individual. So they seek to avoid that by defining their masculinity and thus their self-concept by the need and entitlement to inflict harm, pain, and arbitrary control over women. These men self-soothe by negging, degrading, harming, punishing women, mocking women. And all of this is to avoid mastering self-esteem and the ability to tolerate being an individual. So to these type of guys, the greatest sign of masculine power is to inflict suffering on a woman and have her not resist, have her just endure it, right? He wants to consume feeling powerful by forcing a woman to endure suffering at his hands without resistance. for her to not respond to his intentional abuse and degradation by enacting reasonable consequences like abandoning his ass, right? And let's be clear, abandoning a sadistic abuser is an act of love. Self-love, staying in harm's way, is never loving, right? So it's a profound act of self-love, but it's also loving towards the abuser. For real. No, for real. Because that abuser has the opportunity to learn through consequence that sadistic abuse is intolerable. And then that person can either choose to go confront their wounds, seek support and healing, or they can live in isolation because they are genuinely too sick for social connection. And let's be clear, choosing to remain in helpless, sadistic self-idealization is a choice. It is not a mandate. Men can help themselves. They do have the internal power. And there are so many resources available to them. So many. And these resources should be available, right? You got books, you got therapists, you have men's groups, you have all sorts of modalities of healing and evolution, and many, many trained professionals that are happy and willing to help guide them through these journeys. But the deal is, only men can make the choice to initiate that journey of restoring their own humanity. Only men can choose to do that. Nobody can love a man enough, encourage him enough, or organize him enough. No person can do enough for another person to inspire them to change. That is a self-initiation. So the goal is to avoid enduring freedom and the individuality of life by sadistically controlling women, because these men are subscribing to the belief that they are not individual humans in equal humanness with all other humans, but they are men, and they identify with their gender, not their human individuality. So this pastor wants to repeal women's rights so that the state will come in to be his daddy and enact violence against women to provide the welfare that he needs to experience his sadistic goals. Because healthy women do not consent to sadistic dynamics, right? So as women leave in mass, right, 70% of divorces initiated by women who are saying, I will not tolerate this sadistic, abusive, unfair dynamic anymore, right? So in response to that, this pastor and his ilk are advocating for state violence to reestablish structures of male welfare, right? To restore structures of male welfare that give willfully sick men sadistic codependence as their birthright. And all this just so that men can avoid learning how to cope with their own humanity, with their own individuality, and have to master skills of self-soothing so that they can endure the freedom of life exercised by themselves and others. That's whack. All right, I'm going to wrap it here today. In our next chat, we're going to take a little walkie down history lane to look at what it was really like in America in the 1800s when women were still the common law property of men. What was this golden age of benevolent patriarchs taking care of us little women folk? What was it like, this utopia? Tell me, Pastor, tell me. Well, I'll give you some spoilers, okay? Rampant sexual abuse of children. States set the age of consent as low as 7 years old. I'm not kidding. 7 years old. And child prostitution was massive. Also, we cannot fathom the rate of STIs at that time. Gonorrhea and syphilis were more prevalent than every other infectious disease combined. That's what America was like when women couldn't vote. Sexual abuse of children, the prostitution of children, and also STIs at a rate we cannot fathom. So yeah, really looking forward to winding back the clock. Am I right, good father? All right, but that's it today. I'm Coco. I have ideas. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe. Weekly videos, dismantling patriarchy, talking about it from all angles. I'm on TikTok at Coco Has Ideas, and Instagram, Paraculture Coco, and I always have free writings up at paraculturecoco.substack.com. And drop a line in the comments. Holler at me. Let me know what you think.